Good morning, dear brothers and sisters. Welcome to our daily Talmud discussion. Today is February 2nd, Adar the 1st. The first Adar, the first day of the first Adar. Second day of Rosh Chodesh. That's not complicated. And it is a Wednesday, and we're gathered to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. You know, every once in a while, we have the privilege to see someone step out of the screen and into real life. And Menachem, it was wonderful to see you briefly. And we're studying the Talmud, and we dedicate our learning for the well-being of our dear members of the Chabura and their households, praying for health and happiness and all good things. I do want to mention a special prayer for a refuah shlema for Yaakov ben Chansi. Someone who could use some good news. And we'll also mention Yardena bat Rus, and we'll mention Kalman Yitzchak ben Malka. We should only have good news. Today's discussion, I think we might find interesting. We'll need to pay a little attention. I'll need your help a little bit. And the alternate title of today's discussion is Hilchot Pirates, the laws of Jewish pirates. Those who study the history of pirates or piracy know that the idea of piracy itself was quite complicated. You had governments that sanctioned piracy against their enemies. And sometimes once you start, it's not so easy to stop. And so the subject of piracy is complicated, but as is usually the case, Jews are well represented in every group and every movement and every demo. And so there are books, I believe, on Jewish pirates, especially
there's a whole book about the Jewish pirates who discovered some of the Caribbean islands.
Oh, yeah. So the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. I don't recall the names. I don't know if any of the very famous pirates were Jewish, but it's well known, and there's much work about it. There's actually, I'm trying to remember now. There's I don't know if it's a siddur. There's some interesting.
I don't know if any one of them had the letter of marquee.
I'm sorry.
I said I don't know if any one of them had a formal letter of marquee to operate as a pirate, but they were Jewish pirates.
There are Jewish people that were engaged in, and for some reason, in America and popular culture, piracy is romanticized, probably because of works like Peter Pan and the like, maybe other works, and then more recently have all the different pirates. But anyways, they were Jewish pirates. I don't know if they were observant of the Jewish law, but if they were, it is likely that they would have found our Gemara to be an interesting and informative discussion, because we're going to talk about how to navigate Shabbos on a boat. And actually, I should qualify myself. We'll soon realize that most likely the bulk of our discussion probably didn't work for the pirates of the Caribbean, or pirates that were doing cross-Atlantic piracy, or to be frank, even in the Mediterranean. Now, we should point out that there may have been Jewish people represented among the pirates, but the Jewish interaction and the Jewish experience was more at the wrong end of piracy. Going back in time, many Jews following the Spanish expulsion, many Jews end up falling into the hands of pirates. And the Dutch trading company, I believe, had many Jewish principles, and they were one of the prime targets of piracy. So I think, notwithstanding the fact that there were some Jewish pirates, I think the more common Jewish experience was not one of enjoying meeting a pirate, to put it mildly, and probably most of civilization felt the same way. So how are we talking about pirates? Because we're going to start reading a Mishnah that talks about how to navigate Shabbos. Yeah. So there's actually vast works. And you know which community excelled in more than all other, or was most involved in Pidyon Shavuim? I believe it was Venice. The Venetian Jewish community was quite affluent, and they had a large role. And they were a city that dealt with how do you call it, port city. And I believe they were very involved in Pidyon Shavuim. But there's Turkish town, Salonika, and where else? Anyways, so yeah, Pidyon Shavuim was a big part. And actually, if you look through responsa of rabbis for a period of 500-600 years, you'll see a lot of references to piracy in that context of Pidyon Shavuim, and who gets priority and how to navigate it, etc., etc. So that's not going to be our discussion. Today we're going to talk about how to navigate Shabbos on a boat. And yes, for clickbait, I said it's about pirates, but the truth is, folks have been traveling on boats for a long time, and this may have been relevant, although as we'll see, it's quite limited to a specific scenario of traveling on a boat. But pirate sounds more interesting than a person traveling for business. So that's how we'll frame it. All right, let's share the screen and let's get started. And again, I'll need your assistance and your patience as we work through this, because it's not very complicated, but we'll need some. We'll burn a few brains. We'll employ a few brain cells, let us say. So here we go. Hazoyrek min hayam leyabasha. Person is playing water polo, but instead of throwing to the other person, they throw it out of the sea onto dry land. Or min hayabasha leyam. Probably a beach ball makes more sense. You throw the beach ball back into the water. Umin hayam lusfina, and somebody who throws something from the sea onto a boat. Umina sfina layam, or if a person throws something from the boat into the sea. Umin hasfina lechaverta, or passing something from one boat to the other. So we have sea to dry land to the sea to a boat to a sea, boat to a boat. All different configurations of passing stuff from the sea. What is the halacha? Patur. One is patur. Does this mean that we should or are allowed to carry and pass items from the sea to dry land and all the other configurations? Does patur mean you should do it? So of course not. Patur means patur of al-asr. It is not a biblical act of hotza'ah on Shabbos. Why is that? Rashi explains right away. Karmelis l'rishus harabim. The sea has the din, has the halachic status of a karmelis. So what are you doing?
Can we equate the sfina from one boat to the other boat as transferring from one wagon to another wagon?
Good question.
What?
It's a good question. Let's see, but that's a very good point. Why is it or why is it not similar to throwing an item or passing an item from one wagon to another? And if it is, what would be the halachic ramifications? A very, very good point. So if we need to talk about our piracy analogy, Dr. Hammer, you don't know what you missed. We're talking about pirates. So if you have our pirate analogy, so we know that sometimes a pirate needs to throw, what's the thing they throw from one boat to the other? Is it a grappling hook? Someone help me out over here.
Rabbi, just a general question. Swimming pools is completely different story?
Different topic entirely. Let's not even go there right now. Although perhaps afterwards we'll have some tools to work with, or maybe not. So again, Yam equals Carmelis. Yam equals Carmelis. And so essentially, Rashi points out, all of the different scenarios that our Mishnah mentions are essentially the act of throwing an item from a Carmelis to a private domain, a Carmelis to a public domain, one Carmelis to another, right? Rashi, min hayam liyabasha, mi Carmelis l'rishus harabim. That's throwing something from a Carmelis to what is possibly or plausibly a public domain. Min hayam l'sfina, from the sea to a boat, mi Carmelis l'rishus hayachid. A boat has the halacha of a rishus hayachid. And so Pater 1 has not done a biblical transgression, although certainly they are not in good standing with the rabbinic law if they throw something from the sea to somewhere else. Now the Mishnah, yes.
What is the scenario that is discussed in the Mishnah? We are talking about throwing from the boat to the sea, or between boats, and then we also mentioned from the sea to dry land. Does it mean that we are throwing from the boat to dry land, or does it mean that we are swimming and throwing something to the dry land? What is the distinction between being in the boat and being in the sea, if there is any?
It's a good question. And the way I understand it, when we talk about throwing from the sea to dry land, we're not on a boat. You're in the water swimming or whatever you're doing. Maybe you're standing in shallow water, but you're in the water. So there's an important distinction, namely, the sea has the halachic status of a Carmelis. The boat has the halachic status of a Rishus HaYachid, of a private domain. So they do not have the same halachic status. And Rashi at least explains stuff. Effectively, our Mishnah is talking about a series of acts of throwing something to or from a Carmelis. A Carmelis is treated in rabbinic law like a Rishus HaRabim in many regards, but biblically, it does not have those halachot. It is more like a Makom Ptur, which and therefore biblically one is exempt. That is the gist of what this Mishnah says. Now, what happens if you have sfinois, kshurois, zu, bazu, boats that are all tied up to one another? Why are boats tied to one another? What's that? What is the circumstances that would lead boats to be tied to each other? Any thoughts?
Mostly it's in a marina.
So you're saying maybe in a
Or
marina
unless
you'll
the
have
boat
boats,
is- Unless the boat is being towed.
for boats being towed, or in Florida you have on holiday weekends you always have the police warning about, I guess they have these like large seaside celebrations where they tie their boats up, and invariably there's a intoxication involved and other trouble. But the point I believe we're making here is that the boats, if they're tied together, there's no gap. And so it is a seamless process of going from one Rishus HaYachid to the other. And Rashi tells us the Gemara is going to discuss what the Chiddush is here. So let's hold off on any in-depth analysis. Suffice it to say, Sfinois, Kshurai, Zubazu, boats that are tied together, Metaltalin, Mizulazu, one is permitted to carry from one to the other. Im Einan Kshurais, however, if the boats are not tied together, they are just adjacent, Afapisha Mukafais, even if they are super close to one another, Rashi, Mukafais, Smuchai Zulazu, Kamoi Ein Makifin Shnei Chaviyos. Dr. Stamler, I bet you and I both would not have guessed that Mukafot means tightly adjacent, but Rashi and Rabbi Steinsaltz explained that to us. A boat needs to be tied together for there to be a license to carry from one to the other. The mehefsik Carmelis mifarshim adadi vanan mukin gemara v'sasfina shel shnei adam by the ir metaltalin mizulazu. Okay, Rashi says basically wait for the Gemara, and we'll have a extensive discussion on why they might be a problem to carry from one another. We're assuming they belong to two different people. And
Rabbi,
yes,
in the real world, it is impossible to tie boats together so close that there's no space. The waves, the tide, impossible.
Okay. Probably depends which kind of boat, what kind of method you use to tie. It also probably depends what kind of gap we're talking about, because Rebberal, as you may recall, certain gaps are halachically non-existent. So there's a lot to figure out over here. But suffice it to say, here we're considering boats that are tied to one another. Did we say there's no gap when they're tied? I don't think so. We said that there's no gap when they're not tied together. And so, Rebberal, you're asking, what does that look like? Okay, we have some research. Again, we're not up to there. The Gemara is going to analyze it. But when we get to that part of the Gemara, Rebberal, please remember the question and let's try to workshop it. See if
I hurt my fingers enough times to know that.
I'm sorry to hear that, and I could imagine the weight of a boat. It's probably not fun. So please keep it in mind when we get there so we can workshop it and see what we actually mean that there's no space. Do we mean there's zero space or nominal space? Enough space you're not going to fall through. I don't know the specifics. Let us
Like anything else, it has to be less than 4 tefachim, right?
I'm sorry.
Still to kind of- If it's based on anything we always do, 4 tefachim is considered like net space,
Mhm.
as long as it's less than 4. But that's still enough of the boats are going to bang into each other in the waves.
I'll just interesting. Why do they need to be tied together? Because then it's like two adjacent Rishus HaYachids. But it depends if it belongs to one person or two people, if it needs to be an Eruv. And similarly here, if they're very close but they're not tied, it seems like we're yet concerned that they would drift apart to the point where it would not have the halachic status of an Eruv. And so let us now take a look at the Gemara. And here we go, Hilchis Pirates. All right, Itzmar. How do you make Kiddush? Can you make Kiddush on rum? No, okay. Itmar, here a halacha about how to navigate drawing water onto your boat. Which body of water do you suppose there's going to be drinking water available on the boat? Not the Mediterranean Sea, right? That's salt water. Not the Dead Sea. The Kinneret, however, I guess, and maybe there are other large lakes, or maybe we're talking about riverboats.
The Jordan.
Now, you ever looked at? Have you ever been to the Jordan? The Jordan has places that are quite narrow and minor, and then there's places that it's significant. So anyway, suffice it to say, we're talking about drinking water. So that's why I said, although this sounds like Hilchos Pirates, I don't think most pirates have the capacity to draw and drink water from the Caribbean or when they're in the Atlantic. So anyways, Itzmar, Sfina, you have a boat. Rav Huna says, if you want to draw water, might see in Heimena Ziz Kol Shehu, you extend a little, what do you call it? Plank? You walk the plank, is that what it's called? So you have to extend a little plank or something over the boat. And then you can scoop up water from the sea. Maybe there are other uses for water, but if it's for drinking water, again, you're pretty limited where this is going to work. Rashi might see Ziz Kalshu. You have to put over a little board over the walls of the boats. Rashi says this is simply a sign, to remind of the unique circumstances of boating on Shabbos as a pirate. This is not to touch upon the discussion of if you should set out on a trip on Shabbos or before Shabbos. That's a discussion we talked about long ago. But assuming you're at sea, you're on the high seas, and it's Shabbos, and you want water, so Rav Huna says, stick a little plank of wood over, and you can fill up. Rav Chisda v'Rabba bar Rav Huna Amri. Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Rav Huna say no. You got to do a little more than that. Oise makoim arbo memale. You need to make a little 4 tefach extension. Got to have a little 4 tefach installation hanging over the boat, umemale, and then you can take your water via this 4 tefach protrusion. Ziz kol shehu, any kind of protrusion, little 1 by 2. And Rav Chisda says no, it needs to have 4 tefach. Memale min hamayim min hayam umachnes l'sfina. You use that little protruding area to bring water onto your boat. Makayim arba, what does this 4 tefach arrangement look like? Chalal dalid mukaf mechitzais. You have to have a little box that's open towards the bottom. That's how I imagine it anyways. And you've essentially created a series of mechitzot, of walls that are hanging over the water, and thus muteres b'mayim, mechitzot tluya muteres b'mayim. And so essentially what Rav Chisda is saying is, that you're not allowed to go from, again, we're talking about in the rabbinic law, you're not allowed to carry from a Carmelis to a Rishus HaYachid. So how do you get water out of the sea and onto your boat? By turning the Yam or a little section of the Yam into a Rishus HaYachid. How do you turn a little section of the Yam into a Rishus HaYachid? Simple, by building walls around the Rishus HaYachid. Building walls around the sea in a way that creates now a space of enclosed Yam to have the halachic status of a Rishus HaYachid. That sounds like what Rav Chisda is proposing.
It's interesting that you can actually change the status of something on Shabbos, and that's not considered.
We didn't say you did on Shabbos.
Oh.
Most likely you'd have to do it before Shabbos.
But how can you confine a space when the floor is moving, the sea is moving?
So it's a good question. Number one, apparently, a wall there's a few answers. There's the answer that doesn't really address the essence, which is that you could create walls that are suspended and it projects downward.
No,
But
my
maybe
question is, the walls are okay. You have a problem with the floor. What floor have you made? Rishus HaYachid, the floor keeps changing.
no. Oh, so you're saying you keep on moving over water, and so the area that is considered a Rishus HaYachid keeps on changing. That's true. So we'll see. The Gemara is going to discuss not exactly your question, but the Gemara has a little bit of a challenge to understand exactly what we are talking about. So the Gemara is going to explain their reasoning. ArtScroll makes the case that this would have been happening on the Kinneret. Were there pirates on the Kinneret? I don't know, maybe. The Sea of Galilee. Here. Construct a frame of token walls. Rashi says, Mechitzos ktanos. And they're suspended over the sea. And they have the miraculous ability to transform that which is beneath them into a Rishus HaYachid. Usually, as we'll see, this type of walling system would not work to cause that which is underneath it to be a Rishus HaYachid. This is something unique to do with the sea because, as we'll see very soon, most likely the area we're talking about was already considered a Rishus HaYachid. Again, stand by for the discussion. Rashi and Rav Hai Goin say that this literally turns, even if it's nominal walls, it turns the area beneath it into a Rishus HaYachid. Tosfos disagrees. Tosfos seems to say it has to be you have to be proper walls. Anyways, okay, so that's that. What's proper walls? You have to have 10 tefachim, right? All right, now let's see the Gemara's analysis. So again, what do you do if you're traveling at the sea? You want to be able to take water on Shabbos. You want to be Shabbos compliant. You want to observe Shabbos. So two opinions, two solutions. One says just put a little post over the boat. And the other says, no, you need to make sure that you have an extending box that has 4 tefachim at least of walls. And then according to Tosfos, maybe 10 tefachim, according to Rashi, less. And then you can transform the area beneath this protruding box into a Rishus HaYachid. And one is allowed to take from a Rishus HaYachid to a Rishus HaYachid. Now let's see the Gemara's explanation. Rav Huna Omar Moitzi Heimenaziz Kol Shumim Ale. Rav Huna says all you need is a little projecting piece of something, wood, and then you can fill up water from the sea to your boat. Kasavar, here is Rav Huna's viewpoint on the relationship of the sea or what's the law of the sea? Kasavar Karmelis Mi'ara Moshchinon. Where do we measure 10 tefachim? I'm sorry, where do we measure? Where is the site of the Carmelis? This is shocking. This is not what we expected to hear, I don't think. The Carmelis is from the seabed. And a Carmelist, like a Rishus Harabim, only extends 10 tfachim. So once you are 10 tfachim above the seabed, you are no longer, if this is complicated, bear with me, you are no longer in a Carmelist. You're actually in a Makom Petoru. And therefore, there's absolutely no problem to draw water from the sea, because most likely, most of the sea is deeper than 10 tfachim. Especially because we're not talking about a person taking a kayak or a paddleboard. We're talking about a proper sfina, a proper boat. And as the Gemara is going to discuss, a proper boat cannot come to very shallow area. As a matter of fact, let's go back to our Hilchos Pirates. What do you do if you want to go you go to land? Can you take your pirate ship all the way to the shoreline? I don't think so. You need to take what would you call those little boats?
Dinghy.
A dinghy. You need a dinghy to take you from. So we're not talking about a dinghy over here. We're not talking about a rowboat. We're talking about a proper sfina. And so a sfina is in deep water. And so Rav Huna says, really, you wouldn't need this Z's. You wouldn't even need this little protruding. It's a hecker. It's a reminder that if this would be a Carmelist, you would not be allowed to take from it. Let's see Rashi. Carmelist mi'ara mashchinan. Again, this is when you hear that the sea is a Carmelist. I bet you, like me, I didn't imagine that we're talking about measuring from the bottom of the sea. So the Mariana Trench, is that what it's called? Like you don't even know where what part of it is a Carmelist, because we're talking about really deep water. Let's see Rashi. Carmelist mi'ara mashchinan. Yud shel avir. When the Chachamim say that 10 tfachim above a Carmelist is considered a Rishus, is considered a Carmelist, and above that a Makom Tor.
You might want to mute everything.
Yeah, I think I just.
It's me. I'm having trouble.
No worries. So, okay. So we said v'toifasta ad yod mikarkis hayam mashchinan lahu. We're talking about from the bottom of the seabed. So the most likely time that you'll have trouble on Shabbos is if you are, is it snorkeling? Then you might have a problem. But 10 tfachim above the seabed, it's already a makom ptor. According to Rav Huna, most of the sea is not a Carmelist, although we usually say that the sea is a Carmelist. Most of the sea is actually a makom pitur. It's an area where you may absolutely carry from it to a Rishos Harabim or to a Rishos Hayachid. And therefore, Rav Huna says, you can, if you're a pirate, you practically don't have to worry. You can scoop water out of your boat. But not everybody agrees with Rav Huna. Why? Rav Chisda says, Rav Chisda b'Rabba bar Rav Huna Amri, Oisa Makim Arbo Mamala. Why does Rav Chisda say you actually need to build out a special mechanism to confer the status of a Rishus HaYachid to the sea? Because Sabri Carmelis misfas maya mashchinan. Because Rav Chisda and Rabbi Bar Rav Huna say no. When the rabbis say that the sea is a Carmelis, we mean from the top of the sea. Maya ara samichta. Water is considered like ara samichta. Halachically, we look at what's under the sea as thick earth. And just like we measure a Carmelis' airspace from the ground, the same thing is with the sea. And therefore, ma'avid makem arba, if you do not construct this mechitza mechanism to convert and turn the sea into a rishus hayachid, kamatatam lekarmos l'rishus hayachid, in effect, what the person would be doing is carrying from the Carmelis to the rishus hayachid, from the sea to the boat, and that is not allowed midrabanan. Ara semichtahi v'chol hamayim Carmelisi semichtava. I would venture to say this is a very, very fundamental machloikes in our concept, in our understanding of what the laws of the sea are, what the status of the sea is for the purpose of Hilchos Shabbos. And obviously, you can imagine there are many halachically relevant nafkaminas, many halachic ramifications. Let's take a peek in the Rambam real fast. Let's see how he paskins. Avir Carmelis, the airspace of a Carmelis, Harehi Carmelis Adasar Tfachim. A Carmelis up till 10 Tfachim has the law of a Carmelis, L'malam Asar Tfachim Ba'avir Carmelis, but above 10 Tfachim, Professor, not unlike a Rishus Harabim, it is Makom P'tor, a totally exempt zone. Now let's see what the law of the sea is. Lefichach Mi'al Pnei Hamayim, from on top of the sea, Shebayam V'Sheben Horis, on top of the seas of the rivers, Adasar Tfachim Kaver Carmelis, up to 10 Tfachim, it's like a Carmelis. U'L'malam Asara Makom P'tor. Aval Kol Oimek Kamaleya Mayim Harehu Kekarka Ava. But from the sea, not seabed, from the sea's surface and below, it's just like thick earth. So who does the Rambam Paskin like? This is a solid vote of confidence for Rav Chisda and a strong rejection for the viewpoint of Rav Huna. And of course, the Shulchan Aruch says the very same thing. There you go. Okay. Same exact thing. So this again, an important machlokes, but at least the way it trickles down into the halachic works, we paskin like Rav Chisda, and we'll see maybe why, because the Gemara is going to probe the perspective of Rav Chisda. The Gemara is going to probe the perspective of Rav Huna, and we'll see who the Gemara appears to prefer. Just keep Rashi available. Amar later of Nachman. So again, just to give a fast recap. Our Mishnah talks about the law of the sea. And the Mishnah, especially the way Rashi presents to us what the Gemara is going to tell us, all of the scenarios of the Mishnah are essentially act of carrying from a Carmelis to another space, the sea being a Carmelis. The Gemara immediately asks the question, what if you're a seafaring person and you're Jewish and Shabbos observant? You could be a pirate or a merchant or on a cruise. But what do you do if you need to get water from the river or the sea? Today there's a lot of river cruises, right? And maybe you'll take a day cruise on the Kinneret. And if it's Shabbos, don't ask me how you got on there, but whatever, that's another story. So you're scooping water, and Rav Huna says you're in luck, because effectively the water you see on the top of the water, it's really a Rishus HaYachid. I'm sorry, it's really a Makom P'tor. You may absolutely scoop that water. But for whatever reason, he says put a little post just to remind you that this is not a conventional arrangement. But Rav Chisda says no way. You really need it's a Carmelis until 10 tefachim above the sea. And therefore, if you want to take water from the sea, you are necessarily dipping into Carmelis area. And you're not allowed to carry from a Carmelis to Rishus HaYachid. But if you construct a mechanism, if you construct a mechitza of sorts that is able to convert that which is beneath it to a Rishus HaYachid, well, then you can scoop from the Rishus HaYachid, the area beneath the boat. I'm not beneath the boat, beneath your little protruding box, a mechitza, and then you can bring it onto the boat. Now the Gemara is going to probe, excuse me.
So can you pick up anything, scoop up anything out of the water, or just water?
Interesting question. So you're saying, let's say we construct Rav Chisda's mechanism. We construct this box
So you
with
can go
mechitzas.
fishing, or you pick up water.
So you're asking, can you go fishing? Now, there's another reason why you can't go fishing. Because you cannot do tzad, you cannot capture.
No,
You cannot capture living. But let's say you want to clean let's say you
put a
want to,
bucket into the water, you put a bucket into the water, and a fish happens to get into the bucket, and you pick it up, and now you got a fish in addition to the water.
well, let's forget about fish because you're not allowed to trap or hunt. But maybe you want to clean out pollution from the sea on Shabbos. Can you take a net and scoop out bottles and Coke? The Coke, those plastic things that hold a 6-pack that are infamous for being very dangerous for sea life.
Would there be a problem with the net because you're filtering? Yeah.
So there may be a problem with filtering, but there's another problem, which is, are you allowed to collect something from the sea? And so Reb Menachem's question, which I think is a good one, is this heter only for survival to drink water, or does it extend to other things that you want to do, items you want to scoop out of the water? Your kids are playing catch on the deck of your boat, and the ball falls in the water. Well, if it's a baseball, I think it's going to sink. Actually, does a baseball float?
Depends how much cork is in it.
I was going to say, right, the cork floats, right? But if you have a volleyball or a football or a basketball, I think it's going to float. So can you take your boat? Can you take a net and fish that ball back onto your sea deck if you have a mechanism to convert your your Carmelis into Rishus HaYachid? I don't know the answer. It's a good question. Maybe let's take a look back in the halachic works that we just closed. You know what? It's a good question. I don't have. Go ahead. What was the question?
I was just thinking of another scenario where the boat gets stuck at the bottom because the tide is out and you're on land, and then the tide comes back in, and then you're back on water. In Florida, common occurrence.
I don't know if the Gemara is going to discuss exactly what you're mentioning, but the Gemara is going to talk about the depth of the seabed, particularly as it pertains to the opinion of Rav Huna. So let us take a look. But it's an interesting question. Can you scoop other items out of the boat, out of the sea? Rabbi Menachem, oh no, someone's speaking, but I can't hear you. All right, someone was saying something?
I'm sorry,
All right,
I can't hear you.
Oh, no worries. Someone was saying something. I thought maybe it was you. All right, let's take a look. Rav Chisda. Amar le Rav Nachman le Rabba bar Avua. Rav Nachman bar Avua. Rav Nachman says to Rav bar Avua, "Ole Rav Huna, according to Rav Huna, the Amar might see him and is called Shuma Malo. Says all you need to do is extend a little projection, a rod from the ship, which is a reminder of the laws of Shabbos and how you're typically not meant to take from a Carmelis to a Rishus HaYachid. How does that work? Zimnin the Lake Asara. Sometimes the sea is very shallow, like Raberel asks. Rashi, B'mayim Amuk Asara. What if the sea is very shallow? And if the sea is very shallow and you don't realize and you take a bucket and you scoop water, you think you're scooping from a Makim P'tur. You think you're scooping from the airspace of a Carmelis 10 tefachim higher than the seabed and you're exempt. But in truth, you're scooping from a Carmelis to Rishus HaYachid. How do you avoid this breach of Shabbos protocol? Amar Lei, he says, hold on 1 second. Let's clarify what we're talking about. Gam rinon de ein sfina malechas bichpachas ma'asara. We have it's common knowledge. We know that a sfina, a ship, a big boat, cannot traverse water that is more shallow than 10 tefachim. You'll run aground necessarily. What What does that mean? Are you trying to tell me that the rabbis have a unique Masorah about the nature of boats? Actually, what the Gemara is saying is a little different. Gamrina, we have a halachic, mishnaic principle that to be classified as a sfina, to be classified as a major boat, it's a kind of boat that cannot travel in water more shallow than 10 tfachim. The cholhecha, the Tanya sfina, as Rashi explains, whenever a Braisa or Mishnah use the word sfina, we're talking about a kind of boat that cannot navigate shallow water. We're talking about a ship. We're not talking about a dinghy or a rowboat or a canoe. We're talking about a chashava, a significant boat that is incapable of traversing shallow waters. Therefore, your question, Rav Nachman, you asked the question, what happens if you're scooping water out of a ship in shallow waters? The answer is, it doesn't happen. It could happen on a dinghy. It could happen on a rowboat. It's not going to happen on a sfina. And therefore, perhaps, when it comes to a rowboat, the halacha may be a little different. Maybe a rowboat, we will not be so lenient. Or a dinghy. And there's another shaila. Should a pirate get onto a dinghy on a Shabbos? Okay. So again, the Gemara asks, okay, I understand that a boat that's a big boat cannot go into shallow waters. Have you ever seen a picture of a pirate ship? They have a beautiful, what do we call that in the front? A bow? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Let's actually, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this. Let's take a look. Let's ask Rabbi Google to show us we'll be cheesy, but can you see my screen?
Yeah.
So you see the images of our pirate ships? So here is a poster of a pirate ship, and if you look in the front, it's got this long, what do we call this?
A bow.
That's a bow, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if this is what a boat looked like in the time of the Mishnah. Actually, I could probably tell you with certainty, this is not what a boat looked like in the time of a Mishnah. Let's see if our illustrators gave us a picture. No, not yet. No. They didn't even give us a picture of a ziz versus a... Anyways, okay. But anyway, suffice it to say, let's say this part of the boat cannot go into shallow waters. Less than 10 tefachim.
What would come up if you would ask for ancient pirate ship?
Well, we could just do ancient ship.
What about today, a hydrofoil or a amphibian boat that can go both water and then onto land? Are there any law? What are the laws concerning that?
10 tefachim above the water.
Hold on, I'm looking. See, these ancient ships don't really give us much of a bow. This looks like a Greek kind of ship. Let me see, maybe Rabbi Steinsaltz, I don't think he does. Let's see, maybe he gives us a picture. Oh, hold on. You're right, we're Googling wrong. Roman, let's do a Roman ship, because that would have been a ship in the Mishnaic era would have been a Roman ship. Well, we got a lot of options here.
Those are slave paddle powered.
Right, but there's also sails. But I see something protruding into the water. Actually, is this the front of the boat or is this the front of the boat? You see?
It's the rudder that's protruding.
This is the rudder, but this is the front of the boat, correct?
Yeah.
All right, so let's say it has this kind of elevated design. Again, these are more military. These are like warships as opposed to. Okay, we're gonna do one more. We're gonna do one more Google. Roman trader, a trade ship. We don't want to see a military ship. We want to see a trade ship.
What's the status of the oar extending outside of the boat into the water?
So we're not assuming that the boat is a Jewish boat. We're assuming there's a Jewish a Jewish passenger or a Jewish, all right, whatever. I guess we get the point. You got a boat and you have the morsha. What is a morsha? Roish hasfina hoylech umagbiya min hamayim. The front of the boat lifts above the water. And even suppose the water was very shallow, it's not going to run aground over there because it's the part that's not in the water. And maybe if you drop down a bucket over that edge, you could still get in trouble. Again, however exactly the boat looked,
The big problem with this is that if the oars cause the water to get murky, then you can't scoop anything up because you're scooping up the bottom.
I hear you. But that would be the reason to want to take I hear you. No, that's why you don't want to take it from the front of the boat, right? It's the least murky area. And so here, let's use this picture. This looks like what we're looking for. So here, the front of the boat is elevated. So suppose here is deep, here it's shallow. You're reaching over the edge to get your water. There might be a problem.
What if you fall in?
And then you're in a lot more trouble. Amar of Safra answers, Gashoshi Azli Kama. The reality is that the way these ships worked is they had these poles, and these poles were not just oars, but they would also probe the depth of the sea. And therefore, Bnei Adam Mishamshin Biklonasot et Omek Hamayim, they would use posts and poles to probe the depth of the water. Ve'ein manichin leilei chasfina ela b'makam amok. And as soon as they have the slightest inkling that they're heading into shallow water, they turn and avoid it. Shema temaher leilech v'tishkon la'aretz b'makam moshava, because you do not want your boat to be grounded. That would be a big, grave problem for any boat. We therefore are not concerned about the boat running aground. We're not concerned about the boat going into shallow area, and therefore Rav Huna so far is defending, has his position defended. Our Tosfos disagrees on the definition of morsha, but we'll keep it this for now. Amar le Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak le Rav Chia bar Avin. Now Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak asks Rav Chia bar Avin a question to the position of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda again is the one who says that the top of the sea is the Carmelis, and then 10 tfachim above that is also a Carmelis, and therefore we need to make a proper mechitza, proper walls to convert the Carmelis to be a Rishus HaYachid. And again, we've already had instances of turning a Carmelis into a Rishus HaYachid. And now we're going to ask a question to understand him. According to Rav Chisda and crew, who say you actually need to build out proper mechitzas with at least 4 tfachim of width. So now you got trouble. If you're telling me that the sea and even in the air above the sea is Carmelis, what do you do with your chamber pot? How does one use the facilities? Seems like in ancient times, sailors would pour overboard waste. Rashi, Mayim Royim. Okay, Rashi is a lot more adel than I am. Rashi is more refined. He says, what do you do with the water from the dirty dishes? How do you get it off your boat? Now maybe you'll say, you know what, pour your soapy water, dirty water, off of your platform where you scoop up your water. Gemara says that's not going to work. Me'isile. Then in a sense, you're pouring dirty water into the area where you hope to scoop up water. Hamayim she'em alei shuv derech ha'isem makom. Hold, there's some good questions we can ask, but hold off on those questions. Let's just see the Gemara's thought process, and then we can try to figure it out. What you should do is pour it onto the outer walls of the boat, pull it onto the dofan. The walls were thick, so you could pour something on the sloping part of your boat, and then it'll drip down into the sea. But you have not poured it onto the sea. So the Gemara says, does that work? You are creating with your force, with your energy, with your movement, with your koyach, you're causing this water to go from one rishus to another. Although an indirect action to cause something to go from one domain to another is not a biblical problem, it seems like there is a chachamim, a rabbinic gezerah to prevent it. My answer is b'karmelis legazri. You're right. A person is not allowed to even indirectly cause something to move from a rishus hayachid to rishus harabim or vice versa. But here, all you're doing is causing something to go from a rishus hayachid into a karmelis, and in this scenario, it is permissible. How do I know that when it comes to causing items to go from your boat, from your rishus hayachid to the karmelis, is permissible? The Tanya, there's a brisa that says, "Fina ein metalton lo mitoichel hayam lo min hayam l'toich." There's a brisa that says you're not allowed to carry from the sea to your boat, from your boat to the sea. This is a rabbinic gezerah. We turn now to page 101. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Amuka Asara, Ve'en Gevoya Asara. If the boat is 10 tefachim into the water, but not elevated 10 tefachim above the water, metaltalin mitoicha layam, then you are allowed to carry into the sea. Why is that? Well, let's see. You're allowed to carry from the boat. If the boat is sunken into the water and it doesn't have mechitzas above the water, you're allowed to carry from the sea to the boat, but not from the sea into, from the boat to the sea, but not from the sea to the boat. Why are we not allowing to scoop something from the sea into the boat, but you're allowed to put something from the boat into the sea? Because then you'll end up causing something to go from a karmelis to rishus hayachid. Someone says, hold on, I'm not making metaltal rishus hayachid the karmelis. What we're talking about is you're pouring something onto the rim. Basically, the brisa says you're allowed to cause something to go from the ship into the sea. It doesn't make sense until we clarify that it's an act of pouring over the edge and then it drips into the sea. So this indirect act of transporting an item from the boat to the sea over the edge is permissible, and that is how Rav Chisda would say a person is allowed to pour overboard their waste, and as Rashi says, the water from the dirty dishes. My dear friends, this is the first installment of Hilchas Pirates and the laws of seafaring folk on Shabbas. Suffice it to say, it can be a little complicated, particularly because to cause something to go from the sea to the boat or vice versa is traversing two rabbinically prohibited domains. And we have two different proposals. One of Rav Huna who says, actually, the sea is in truth a makom patur. Only the seabed is a problem. We have Rav Chisda who says, no, the seabed, not only the seabed, but actually the edge, the top of the sea is also a karmelis, and therefore you have to build a mechitza. And then we've gone through and worked through both opinions, and with Hashem's help, we'll continue this discussion tomorrow. My dear friends, wishing everyone a wonderful.
Rabbi, I'm getting a sinking feeling.
I thought you were going to say you got seasick, but just a sinking feeling. Okay. Have a wonderful day. Be well. And thank you all
Pleasure,
for,
sir.
Stay
Thank
on
you
dry
all for-
land. Stay on dry land.
thank you all for being on board. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.